Welcome back. You are with the news today. Now, state after state is extending their lockdowns. Maharashtra today extended their lockdown, for example, till the 1st of June. As a result, not only lives, but also livelihoods now are at stake. In Punjab, for example, migrant labor is once again on the move and unemployment fears are raising their head. In a moment, we'll be joined by Mahesh Vyas of the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. But first, take a look at this special report from Punjab from Manjeet Sehgal.
These are scenes that seem deja vu, and not without reason. Reminiscent of what happened in March and April of 2020, the migrant workers are on the move once again, going back to where they belong. The partial and weekend lockdowns have resulted in another exodus from the industrial areas of Punjab, Haryana and Himachal Pradesh. With no lessons learned from 2020 and not much hope of institutional help, the industrial and farm sector labour are homeward bound to their villages in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and Jharkhand. With jobs shut and scope of earnings diminished, they feel they are better off going home.
Though none of the government, be it Punjab or be it Haryana or the Chandigarh administration, has so far announced a lockdown, but the workers who are working in various units have started going towards their villages. जाने का कारण क्या है?
जाने का कारण अब लॉकडाउन लग जाएगा तो यहाँ क्या करेंगे, क्या खाएंगे, कैसे क्या होगा। रूम भाड़ा भी देना पड़ता है, राशन का भी खर्चा देना पड़ता है।
जाने की देर है सर, गांव जाएंगे। गांव में क्या है कि अगर कुछ काम नहीं मिला तो रहने का भाड़ा नहीं है, देना होगा। घर पे आराम से रह के खाने को तो मिलेगा, इधर तो खाने के वांदे हो जाएंगे रहने पे। कमाई होगी नहीं तो फिर प्रदेश में कौन खिलाएगा।
Despite the partial lockdown in Punjab, there is much activity at railway and bus stations. And if there is one big difference from the migrant crisis of 2020, it is that the interstate movement of buses and trains have not been restricted this time. Pappu Kumar of Madhepura, Bihar, has been working as a mason in Jalandhar for 22 years. Even he has now decided to leave his workplace till life comes back to normal.
गाँव सर इसलिए जा रहे हैं, यहाँ पर जो है इतना काम भी नहीं मिल रहा है और हम लोगों को बहुत प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है। एक तो दुकान भी नहीं खुलती है समय से, ना राशन पानी टाइम से मिलता है। काम पर जाते हैं तो दुकान 3 बजे के बाद बंद होती है। तो इस वजह से हम लोग को बहुत ज़्यादा परेशानी आ रही है, इस वजह से घर जा रहे हैं सर।
The directions issued by the state governments to the district administration to retain the labourers by offering them food and shelter seemingly remain on paper. Though industrialists in Jalandhar and Ludhiana claimed that they were offering labourers work despite the lockdown. But then they too are uncertain of how things would finally pan out.
आजकल की है खौफ के कारण जिन्नी भी साडा स्टाफ है लेबर है वो अपने अपने गांव अपने अपने जा रही हैं। उन्होंने बस यही डर है कि लॉकडाउन दोबारा लग जाएगा। उन्होंने खौफ के कारण कि वो ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਉਹ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਲੇਬਰ ਹੈਗੀ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਗਾਵਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚਲੀ ਗਈ ਹੈ।
According to an estimate, the industrial units in North India are reporting a shortage of labourers between 30 to 40%. And every day the migrant labour continue to leave because with their daily wage jobs suspended, they have no means to earn and no reason to stay. This report filed by Manjeet Sehgal with inputs from Chandigarh, Jalandhar and Ludhiana for India Today.
And joining me now is the Chief of the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, Mahesh Vyas, joins me. Appreciate your joining us, Mr. Vyas, as we look at the job situation post-COVID 2.0. The CMIE numbers, May 11th, unemployment rate, which was falling since October last year, has now picked up again. Gone up to as high as 8.3% as of 11th of May. Urban unemployment 10.6%, rural at 7.3%. How worrying, alarming are these signals, Mr. Vyas, again, of the job crisis?
We should certainly start worrying about these numbers. They have been a cause for concern for the last few months. Although the unemployment rate has come down, What is more important is to look at the labor participation rate. And that number has been sliding for several months now. So what happens is lesser and lesser number of people are participating in the labor markets. And therefore, the unemployment rate was looking like it was in control because the denominator itself was shrinking. Now what is happening is in spite of a shrinking denominator, the unemployment rate has gone up. So even now, if we wake up and see that the labor markets are really stressed out, it will be a good thing because it is very worrying.
And it's not clearly as bad as it was in lockdown 1.0 last year between April and June when it went up to as high as 24%. Presumably that was a total lockdown. But this time it is much more localized in terms of lockdown. So are we seeing wide variations across the country that in areas which are seeing these harsh lockdowns, livelihoods are at stake more there than in other areas?
Yes, there is some evidence to the effect. Labor participation rate in Maharashtra fell a lot more sharply than it fell in other states. And in Maharashtra in April, we did see a more severe lockdown than in other parts of the country. So there is a relationship between the lockdown and a fall in the labor participation rate. You are right that it's not as bad as it was in April 20. But you know, what's happened is we took a big hit then in April 20, May 20, and then we kind of bounced back fairly smartly after that. But after September 2020, the recovery process kind of got exhausted. And we started sliding again thereafter without fully recovering. So we had a labor participation rate of around 42% before the pandemic hit us. We went down to 36%, came back, but came back only to 40%. So we lost 2 percentage points in labor participation rate. And that, I think, is the most worrying part, that lesser people are getting engaged in fruitful economic activity. So I think that's really, really worrisome. Although we are not as bad as we were then, but that's not the right way of looking at things. I think we should see what have we lost. And what we have lost, which is most important, is 2% of the labor force is missing compared to where we were before the pandemic.
I'm trying to understand what you've just said. You're saying 2% of the labor force is missing post-COVID 1.0, and that continues in a way to be missing from the labor force. Now, we're doing stories from the ground which is showing migration again taking place from urban to rural, but in 2020, many of them got Manrega jobs. Now, this time, the worry is that rural India has also been hit by COVID 2.0. So, where is this missing labor, and could this time rural India and rural employment also get hit?
So, where has this labor gone? It has gone back home dejected. That the economy is not able to provide us jobs, and there's no point in us looking for jobs anymore. So if Manrega bails them out again, like I think it should again this time, it will be okay. But otherwise, this labor, this 2% that is missing, is actually disappointing. They're saying that there's no point. I mean, we go to the markets looking for jobs, but there is no job. And as we can see in April now, although the numbers of people coming to the labor markets looking for jobs has shrunk, between March and April, Rajdeep, 1.1 million less people came to look for work, just between these 2 months. And the number of people employed fell by 7.35 million. So, when 7.35 million less people employed, it tells the rest of the people that go home, there are no jobs here, and therefore the labor force shrinks.
And these are daily wage labor, informal labor, Mr. Vyas, daily wage labor, informal labor, which is again taking the maximum hit as per your numbers?
The daily wage laborers are not getting as much of a hit this time, not in April. So they seem to be slightly better off. Mind you, daily wage laborers get hit when there's a very severe lockdown of the kind that we had in April and May 2020, when you're just locked in, not allowed to come out at all. But daily wage laborers are allowed to work around this time in construction sites. And there are many other places where even in Maharashtra, there were exceptions and people were allowed to work. So the hit on daily wage laborers is not as bad as it used to be earlier. They seem to be getting an income hit, but we will wait for the data to come for that. What I'm seeing is a secular decline in salaried jobs. Between January 21 and April 21, nearly 9 million salaried jobs were lost. So that's really big. And in April, we saw 3.84 million salaried jobs getting lost. So that's the secular decline I worry about.
And that is worrying, because that you're saying actually preempts the actual COVID 2.0. From January itself, we are seeing a secular decline in salaried job. Presumably companies are downsizing, some possibly folding up. One industry particularly badly hit, it appears, Mr. Vyas, is restaurants, and once again service sector, but particularly restaurants and hospitality, many of them now once again having to close down. Is that the worry? Is this sectoral, or do you believe that the decline is across the plane when you say that salaried jobs are declining starting January this year?
Well, all that you said is right, but I think there's one more dimension to this, which I think is more overarching, which is the fall in employment in MSME sectors. That's mostly in rural India. So I see a lot of stress in salaried jobs in rural India, which is largely a reflection of the MSME sector taking this hit very seriously and people losing jobs over there. Salaried jobs in rural India means industrial workers losing their jobs in a big way. So I think the problem is not just in some sectors, but in the smaller enterprises that are unable to withstand the storm that we are facing.
Okay, Mahesh Vyas there giving us a sense of the job crisis, the unfolding job crisis in the country. I know I keep giving you depressing news, but our job is to tell you what's happening as the reality around us. But let me cheer you up.